Welcome back to Crimes in the Quiet, where we dive into the stories that rocked history, even if some people back then would have sworn it could never happen in their refined little world. Today we're heading to Boston in 1849. Picture it: cobblestone streets, horse-drawn carriages, and everyone pretending they're way classier than they actually are. Boston was the intellectual capital of New England. Harvard sat right there in Cambridge, just across the Charles, pumping out scholars and doctors like it was an assembly line of brilliance. Or at least that's what they told themselves.
Yeah, it was the kind of place where people polished their silver spoons and measured their worth by which old family graveyard they could point to. And at the heart of it all, Harvard University. It wasn't just a school. It was the place for science, medicine, and law. The professors weren't just teachers, they were celebrities. They were supposed to be men of integrity, honor, knowledge, the kind of people you'd never in a million years expect to see in the headlines of a murder trial.
Except that's exactly what happened. Enter John Webster, Harvard chemistry professor. Not some obscure adjunct either. This guy had a real chair in the department. He lectured in the grand halls, wore his academic robes, spoke in that whole scientific authority tone, and was considered respectable if you ignored his terrible money management skills.
Oh yeah, Webster couldn't manage a budget to save his life. And I mean that literally. He was born into privilege, enjoyed the best of Boston society, but somehow spent money faster than water going through a sieve. He borrowed money left and right, lived beyond his means, and acted like people should just be grateful to loan him cash because, hey, he was John Webster from Harvard.
Enter George Parkman. Now, Parkman was the complete opposite. He was Harvard educated too, but he was all about business. He came from one of those old-money Boston families, the Boston Brahmins, as they called themselves. You know, the kind of people who thought the city belonged to them. Parkman made his fortune as a physician turned real estate mogul, and he was meticulous about money. Like, the guy could probably tell you the serial numbers on every bill in his pocket.
And that's not an exaggeration. People said Parkman was tall, thin, sharp-featured, and walked so fast through Boston that you practically had to sprint to keep up with him. He had this reputation for being, let's say, not warm and fuzzy. He was frugal to the point of obsession. If you borrowed from Parkman, he would hunt you down, chase you through the city, and demand every last cent back.
Guess who owed him money? Yep. John Webster. And not just pocket change. Webster had borrowed heavily from Parkman, mortgaging some of his own property to secure the debt. But then Webster, genius that he was, went and borrowed money from other people against the same property, which is basically financial fraud in slow motion.
Yeah, it's like he thought Parkman wouldn't notice, but Parkman always noticed. So by November 1849, Parkman is furious. He's pressing Webster hard for repayment. On November 23rd, Parkman goes out on one of his trademark fast walks through Boston, telling people he's headed to Harvard Medical College to talk to Webster about the debt. That's the last time anyone sees him alive.
And here's where Boston goes into full panic mode. This wasn't some random guy who went missing. This was George Parkman, wealthy, prominent, connected. His disappearance was like if Jeff Bezos just stopped showing up at Starbucks one morning. Everyone was talking. Newspapers were plastering his face everywhere, and search parties were scouring the city.
And then comes the plot twist. A janitor at Harvard Medical College, Ephraim Littlefield, starts noticing weird things. He's basically the guy who cleaned up after all the brilliant doctors. And Littlefield tells people, Professor Webster has been acting sketchy lately. Oh, and by the way, I heard him locking his lab really tight, and also he seemed super nervous about anyone going down near his laboratory.
Very suspicious, right? Eyebrows were raised. So Littlefield decides to investigate on his own. And in one of the most horrifying moments of 19th century true crime, he breaks through a wall in the basement near Webster's lab and finds human remains. Parts of George Parkman's body.
Yeah, let's just pause here for a second. This is Harvard Medical College. They literally dissect bodies as part of the curriculum. There are cadavers everywhere. And yet, even in that setting, the remains were clearly not just another cadaver. They had been stuffed, hidden, and partially burned in Webster's lab.
Exactly. The jawbone and false teeth were identified as Parkman's, thanks to his dentist, which, by the way, is one of the earliest uses of dental forensics in history. Imagine being the dentist. Yep, those are my dentures. Oh my God, that's my patient.
The whole city was scandalized. Boston society loved their image of refinement, but here was a Harvard professor on trial for brutally murdering a Harvard benefactor. It was like a nightmare soap opera no one could look away from.
So Webster gets arrested. His defense, he swears he didn't kill Parkman. He says maybe the janitor did it or maybe it was someone else. But the evidence was stacked against him. The trial in 1850 was sensational. People packed the courtroom, newspapers ran daily updates, and everyone had an opinion. It was basically the trial of the 19th century.
And in the end, Webster was convicted of murder. The jury took less than 3 hours to decide. He was sentenced to death and hanged in August 1850. Harvard tried very hard to move on quickly, but the stain of the case lingered. For a school built on prestige, it was awful to have one of their own professors exposed as a killer.
What's wild is how much this case shaped legal and forensic history. It wasn't just about a murder. It was about class, privilege, science, and the way evidence was handled. Dental identification, circumstantial evidence, and the reliance on expert testimony all became huge talking points in law after this.
Plus, it shattered the illusion that Boston Brahmins were above crime, because here was proof. Money troubles, desperation, and human flaws don't care if you have a Harvard chair and a family pedigree.
So to sum up, a Harvard chemistry professor with a spending problem murders the city's most obsessive debt collector. A janitor busts the case wide open. A dentist provides key forensic evidence, and Boston society collectively faints onto their fainting couches.
Honestly, it's got everything. Prestige, scandal, forensic firsts, and the kind of irony that makes you shake your head. Harvard chemistry professor couldn't figure out the chemistry of not getting caught.
And with that, we close the book on the Webster Parkman case. A reminder that sometimes the darkest crimes don't come from the shadows. They come from the marble halls of so-called respectability.
Thanks for listening to Crimes in the Quiet, where we dive into the stories that rocked history, even if some people back then would have sworn it could never happen in their refined little world. Join us next time as we dig into another story where history and crime collide.